Now, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you a man who is privileged to serve on the advisory board of Christian Crusade. And we're privileged to have him. But more than that, in my opinion, he is the Will Rodgers of our time. He's the greatest orator of the right wing. He's one of the greatest guys living. He's a patriot, a Christian, and a friend. Let's give a rousing welcome to Tom Anderson.
Thank you very much. Recently in New York, when a screaming young woman was raped in a building on a busy street, a policeman testified in court 40 people could have saved that girl, but none did. 2 9-year-old boys were drowned in an inlet in Jersey City as one man tried to rescue them while 50 others stood idly by. 1,000 watched in Chattanooga as a teenage mob savagely attacked 2 men who merely asked some of the boys to get off the roof of their car so they could go home from the lake. A few months ago, a young woman was returning from work in New York City. She was attacked by a madman with a knife. He hacked on her for 40 minutes. While 38 people were watching out the windows just like they were watching a movie on the booth tube. He even left her for 20 minutes and came back and finished the job. Incredibly, not one single person had the morality and the courage to come outside and help. Not one single person even had the morality and courage to go to the telephone and call the police. They told the police later we didn't want to get involved. May God have mercy on their uninvolved souls.
Amen.
We will either get involved or we will get enslaved. Several weeks ago, I saw a little squib in the newspaper saying that the administration had told the Secret Service to make a full investigation and report on all organizations and all individuals who pose a potential physical threat or are a source of embarrassment to President Johnson, Vice President Humphrey, and members of the Cabinet. I intend to continue to embarrass all these people. Whenever I believe it is my moral, legal, and patriotic responsibility to do so. You do as you will. I may die in a dictatorship, but I'm not going to live in one. Lyndon Johnson said recently he is going to defrock the John Birchers. I don't know a single John Bircher who would go skinny dipping with Lyndon. Who are these people who pose the potential threat or source of embarrassment? Not the likes of Lee Harvey Oswald. He was not under surveillance, but conservatives were in Dallas. Is it Gus Hall, head American Comrade? No. Hall is a great supporter of the Great Society. Who is the menace? First, of course, there's Robert Welch. He's very dangerous because he has brains. At age 7, he had read Rip's 7-volume History of the World. At age 7, I was trying to read I See a Cat. Two other particularly dangerous characters are Dr. Carl McIntyre and Dr. Billy James Hargis. They are going to the extreme of buying time on radio to tell the American people to stick with the Bible instead of with the United Nations. They preach Christ, and worse than that, his virgin birth, his divinity, his miracles, his saving power, his resurrection, and his promise of eternal life. This is, as Senator Fulbright has said of our Constitution, outdated and unsuited for our modern complex life, according to the so-called modern theologians. The greatest American of our time, General Douglas MacArthur, said, quote, "There can be no compromise with atheistic communism, no halfway in the preservation of freedom and religion. It must be all or nothing." When the extremists who wrote the Declaration of Independence assembled in Philadelphia from over the 13 colonies, the first thing to greet them was an anonymous note found on the speaker's table. It said, "Take care. A plot is framed for your destruction, and all of you shall be destroyed." When the final vote was taken in Independence Hall on July the 4th, every man who signed the Declaration of Independence took his life in his hands. If Washington's ragged, outnumbered army could not repulse the British, every signer would be tried for treason to the British crown. Have you ever wondered what happened to the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence, pledging their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor that this nation under God would not perish from the earth? 5 were captured and tortured by the British. 9 fought and died from wounds and hardships of war. 12 had their homes pillaged and burned. 2 lost their sons in battle. Another had 2 sons captured. John Howard was driven from his wife's bedside as she lay dying. Their 13 children fled for their lives. His mill and fields were laid waste for more than a year. He lived in forests and caves, and he returned home to find his wife dead and his children vanished. And a few weeks later, he died from exhaustion and heartbreak. Norris and Livingston suffered similar fates. Carter Braxton of Virginia, a wealthy planter and trader, saw his ship swept from the seas by the British Navy. He sold his home and properties to pay his debts and died destitute. Vandals and soldiers looted the properties of Ellery, Clymer, Hall, Walton, Gwinnett, Haywood, Rutledge, and Middleton. At the Battle of Yorktown, Thomas Nelson Jr. urged General Washington to fire on his, Nelson's, home, which British General Cornwallis had taken over for his headquarters. Washington did, and he too died broke. Who are these super patriots? 24 were lawyers and judges, 11 were merchants, 9 were farmers. These men, whom we call patriots today, were regarded as radicals by the moderates of their time, who counseled, "Come and let us reason together with the king." They all signed the Declaration of Independence knowing full well that the penalty would be death if they were captured. They knew that King George would brand them as traitors, which he did. They knew they would be tracked down, persecuted, and killed, which they were. They could have gone along, like some of our fat cats are doing today. Gone along with what they think is the wave of the future and stayed on top for a while at least. I was in New Orleans a few months ago. I happened to be standing by on a TV interview. The president of one of America's biggest corporations was being interviewed. He was asked, "What do you think of the wheat sale to Russia?" He said, "I believe in selling anything to anybody for a profit." The interviewer asked me a little later, "Mr. Anderson, would you like to comment on the wheat sale to Russia?" And I said, "I never wanted to comment worse in my life. This reminds me of Lenin's prediction. The businessman will sell the rope to hang himself with if he can make a profit on it. I think it's immoral, inexcusable, unforgivable, and stupid to sell or give anything to any communist under any circumstances at any price." We so-called haters are accused of intolerance. one of the greatest national weaknesses and sins is an excess of tolerance. Let us not mistake ignorance or cowardice for tolerance. One is not capable of tolerance unless one has a conviction. A person unable to arrive at convictions is a person morally immature. Like the bachelor long ago who had just come from a friend's wedding and asked Socrates, "Sir, is it better to marry or not?" And the sage replied, "Whatever you do, you will repent it." January 26, 1965, Look magazine blurbed, quote, "The radical right's totalitarian methods in the campaign and since seriously threatens American freedom," reports Senator Church. "The mutual confidence essential to free government is slowly being cut away by propaganda. Step by step, decent citizens come to tolerate attacks upon the loyalty of loyal men. They spread virus like typhoid mares, virulent fanaticism. The radical right is not so much the enemy of communism as it is the enemy of freedom. It opposes the only programs that fight the real communist threat, which festers on the miseries of the people in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and focuses instead on a straw man specter at home. The resulting fear undermines public confidence in the very institutions of popular government, the men in Congress, the Supreme Court, and the presidency itself," said Look magazine. "I plead guilty to being the enemy of programs which are surrendering us to history's most diabolical anti-God conspiracy. And I have no confidence in President Johnson, Humphrey Dumpty, and their rubber-stamped Congress." Or in the Supreme Court, and most of all in Look magazine. I wouldn't believe the page number in Look magazine. That's why I counted them all. The most powerful weapon in the world is not the hydrogen bomb, but public opinion. The Communist bloc every year devotes 150,000 hours of broadcasting time to radio programs in all languages, produces 2 billion brochures, 120 million books, 200 films, and dispatches 20,000 people across the free world to spread their propaganda. And we have a radio program. But it's difficult to tell which side the voice of America is on. Now, we do have some great anti-communist and pro-freedom publications like Christian Crusade and Free Enterprise, Human Events, American Opinion, National Review, Dan Smoot Report, The Wanderer, The Independent American, and so forth, and all of them combined have less than 500,000 circulation. The 5 largest American magazines reach 30 million homes. And almost any week you can read about the mellowing communists, the glories of peace at any price, and lies and distortions about the communist invasion of Selma and the South. A recent issue of the Saturday Evening Post carried an article, quote, "Communism is not what we think." The article said communism and communists are not really so bad. What's bad is our misconception, a partial cause of the Cold War, which keeps our government under pressure to follow policies based on ignorance. The Post said, "In time we will accept it, communism, as a civilizing force that deserves encouragement, because it is improving the lot of the Russian people. A blind fight against communism is self-defeating," says the Post. "It means in the case of Russia that we are fighting against many of their hopes and ideals we cherish for ourselves." That sort of let the cat out of the bag, didn't it? Even the Post's interpretation of the famous telephone conversation between Wally Butts and Bear Bryant was more accurate than that. A September 1964 issue of Life magazine describes the Russian prisons in life glowingly and pictures its killers as men of distinction. The communist butchers were made to look like ministers, and when the leftist press pictures right-wingers like Joe McCarthy or Robert Welch, or Billy James Hargis, they are made to look like wild-eyed maniacs who should be in an institution. Speaking of institutions and misconceptions reminds me of the following letter which was received in Congress recently. It said, "Dear sirs, they tell me that Congress is one of our best institutions. Would you please tell me what I have to do to get into it? I spend most of my life in institutions. Please excuse me for writing in crayon, but they don't allow us to have anything sharp in here. Now, I'd rather have him than some we've already got." At least he knows where he stands and he tells you the truth about it. Brings to mind this letter sent to a newspaper medical column. It said, "Dear doctor, please send me the name of a good book on personal hygiene. I think I've got it." I think most psychiatrists have got it. Man, the story of two ladies were locked up in a nut house, and one turned to the other and rattled, "I wish a man would come by and make love to me." And the other said, "She ain't going to be with us long. She's talking sense." President Johnson has been called the most frugal spendthrift in the history of the presidency. His inconsistencies are as colossal as his ego. LBJ said recently that we cannot suspend the armed forces draft now because it would cost too much money. Reminds me of the treasurer of the Woman's Club who got up and reported, "I am happy to state that through prudent management, we ended the year with a deficit of $114.28. And a member jumped up and said, "I move it, we donate it to the Salvation Army." Having already bought and paid for, or more appropriately, borrowed for, the lower classes, the great socialist society has now set out to seduce the middle classes. Congress has agreed for you to pay rent of people making up to $11,200 in New York in a bill passed a month or so ago. The statesman appropriated $6 billion to be stolen from the well-to-do. The great decedent now has the Negro vote, the labor vote, the foreign vote, the underprivileged vote, the stolen vote, and the House vote. The act was proposed and twisted into being by Lyndon Johnson, multimillionaire of Johnson City, Texas, and Washington, D.C. So, if you have been saving money to buy a home, forget it. Let somebody else do it for you. That's the new American way. How do you go about getting your neighbor to pay your rent? If you make less than $8,900 and would like to have a bigger house, just write the socialist who represents you in Washington. There are approximately 47 million families in the United States. 40% of them, or more than 18 million homes, can qualify to get in on the housing steal. 18 million families. That represents more than twice as many eligible votes as Goldwater got in the past election. Here's the way it works. If your income is $8,000 and you want to live in a house renting for $220 a month, that's as high as the bill allows, the taxpayers of the United States will pay the difference between the annual rent, $2,640, and one-fourth of your income, or $640 per year. How will the socialists in charge know that the income figures you furnish them are honest? According to Robert Weaver, administrator of the Housing and Home Finance Agency and one of the top niggers in government, quote, there will be spot checks. And there's one other check, too, which I hate to say. Your friends and neighbors would be very much concerned about this, reported Mr. Weaver. They are the best investigators that you have in these projects. Close quote. Of course, every police state has its informers. Commissioner Weaver has broad authority to decide who qualifies for rent subsidies. I personally have already seen this program in operation. I was in Russia 5 years ago. In Russia, all houses are subsidized. The government owns them and the people. And I didn't see a single private dwelling in Russia which would sell for as much as $25,000 in Los Angeles. I'm sure the one killer Khrushchev lives in is better than that. The communists do provide adequate housing for their killers and retired killers. This bill was passed in spite of the fact that the government's own figures show that more than 90% of all American families in the $4,000 to $8,000 income class are already adequately housed. The so-called experimental program is set up to run 40 years, after which the communists then running the government will rename it and continue. Time limitations and a weak stomach provide my listing all the goodies provided in the 10 titles of the Housing and Urban Development Act. I have several specific proposals to make in regard to this bill. One, the 208 members of the lowest house who voted for it should be impeached and ridden out of Washington on a rail. Two, somebody should be organizing another Boston Tea Party. This is worse socialism than Great Britain's got. Our nation is on the verge of anarchy. We are headed toward revolution. Little Rock, Oxford, Selma, Chicago, we have seen only the beginning. There will be much blood in the streets, south and north. As agitator John Wallace said to a group in Selma recently, this is revolution. And agitator Lyndon Johnson told a group of students the same thing this week. Representative Arnold Olson, Democrat of Montana, has introduced a bill in the consensus grist to provide a national cemetery in every state. This is the logical and long overdue thing if we are to achieve the grave society we have already nationalized by means of federal conquest, usurpation, occupation, bribery, bulldozer, legal theft, and federal aid, every form of activity from womb but not including tomb. So why not national cemeteries in each state, where all local politicians owned by the great decedent could look forward to a permanent lie-in at government expense? These cemeteries, of course, would be fully integrated. And the integration of cemeteries is a facet of life in which we have fallen far behind. I don't recall that even Ralph McGill has yet realized that separate but equal death is a national disgrace. Either these cemeteries shall overcome, or eventually we will be faced with transporting hearse loads of bodies back and forth across town as we bring to an end the shameful second-rate death we have imposed on our Negro brethren through forcing them to use underprivileged cemeteries. The Civil Rights Bill, so-called, was forced through the Congress by Lyndon Johnson and Humphrey Dumpty. The Civil Rights Bill is part of the grand design of the collectivist conspirators for their one world, one race, mongrel, one church, apostate and antichrist, one government under the beast. The collectivists now tell us that any form of discrimination shows moral immaturity. Reminds me of the man who divorced his wife because she was so immature. He said, why, Judge, she would even barge into the bathroom while I was in the tub and sink all my boats. Russian counter-spy for the FBI for 22 years has said, quote, Martin Luther King is a member of more Communist Front organizations than any communist in the United States. Martin Luther King belongs to 60 Communist Front organizations, close quote. Because a half dozen grasshoppers under a fern make the field ring with their importunate clink, where thousands of great cattle repose beneath the shadow of the British oak, chew their cud and are silent, pray do not imagine that those who make the noise are the only inhabitants of the field, that of course they are many in number, or that after all they are other than the little, shriveled, meager, hopping, though loud and troublesome insects of the hour. The insect of the hour is Martin Luther King. I don't hate Martin Luther King, I only hate the things he sits in for. Remind me of the story of the Catholic priest who visited two beatniks. The priest had his arm in a sling, and one beatnik asked him how he broke his arm. He told him he slipped in the tub. When the priest left, one beatnik turned to the other and said, "What's a tub?" The other said, "Hell, I don't know. I ain't no Catholic." Particularly care whether Martin Luther King is a communist. He has surrounded himself with identified communists and a convicted homosexual. He's carrying out the communist program. A true man of God does not surround himself with communists, homosexuals, atheists, and anarchists. We teach our children that they will be judged by the company they keep. It is not enough to avoid evil, that they must avoid appearance of evil. A government autocratic enough to tell a business who it must hire must eventually tell workers where they must work. A government which permanently ends all unemployment will eventually end all freedom. As important as the right to get rich is the right to be a bum. As important as the right to freely associate is the right to be a bigot. As important as the right to be right is the right to be wrong. As long as I am in business, I will exercise my right to work or not to work anybody because of race, creed, color, sex, or the way they part their hair. If I want to pursue my happiness by hiring only bald-headed aboriginal idiots, that is my natural right, and I will be uncivil to all who try to deny it. I wouldn't hire anybody who even looked like Hubert Humphrey. Or anybody who reminds me of Lyndon Johnson. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover has warned, quote, the communist plan is to conquer the United States. If not today, then tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then the next day, next month, next year, close quote. With the help of our clergymen, Hollywood, press and networks, and educators. Like Professor Milton Miles, who is reported to have said recently, quote, we must haul down the American flag, haul it down, stamp on it, and spit on it. Close quote. In 1961, J. Edgar Hoover summed up the situation as follows, quote, the successful exploitation and manipulation of youth and student groups throughout the world today are a major challenge which free world forces must meet and defeat. Recent world events clearly reveal that world communism has launched a massive campaign to capture and maneuver youth and student groups. Close quote. It can't happen here. It already has. And it's almost too late. A recent survey conducted by several universities among high school juniors and college juniors found out this, quote, 71% would deny an accused person the right to confront his accuser. 41% believe that freedom of the press should be canceled. 26% would allow search and seizure without consent. 53% favor government ownership of banks, steel companies, and railroads. 56% voted for close government regulation of all businesses. 62% said a worker should not produce all he can. 61% rejected the profit motive as unnecessary or desirable. And 84% denied that patriotism is important. In a poll at a West Coast university on a choice between war and surrender, 60% of the students voted to surrender. No wonder, they've been brought up on a surrender diet. In many of our schools, there are now classes in communism taught by socialists. Having socialists teach anti-communism is like employing Elizabeth Taylor to teach a course in chastity. A while back, I spoke at UCLA. I don't know how that happened. I guess Gus Hall wasn't available. I saw the largest aggregation of unwhite, zoot-suited, bearded, black and white beatniks, anarchists, and slobs since the marchers were carrying the Stevenson and Kennedy banners in the 1960 Democrat Convention. Except for Selma, of course, and that was the all-un-American low. I spoke in the lounge of the Student Union at UCLA. One couple was lounging on the sofa in the rear, making out, and I became so engrossed on the progress of that and how it was going to come out, I couldn't even think about what it was saying. When I tried to be serious, talked about morality, they laughed. When I tried to be funny, they were stony-faced. And when I was through, the moderator got up and said, just because a person comes here and tells you things you have never heard in your life doesn't mean you should ridicule him. I would far rather my children be grammar school dropouts like Abraham Lincoln and Winston Churchill and Jesus Christ than to graduate from UCLA. As a matter of fact, I've always thought that a college degree is the most overrated thing since Dwight Eisenhower. We had a press interview yesterday. They called it that. They kept asking us how many communists there are in this country. Nobody could tell them. They just referred them to J. Edgar Hoover. I'm sure he knows where most of them are right now. There were about 50 that took over Cuba. It's not how many there are, it's where they are and who they are. In Russia, a few thousand revolutionaries turned that nation of 150 million people into a slave state. In America, the communists say it should be done gradually. Quote, in such countries, United States, England, and so forth, the nationalization of all the land can only be brought about gradually by means of a series of transitional measures. Close quote. This preparation for communism is being done now, according to no less an authority than Norman Thomas, the six-time Socialist Party candidate for the presidency of the United States. Thomas said recently, quote, I ought to rejoice, and I do. I rub my eyes in amazement and surprise. His, Johnson's war on poverty, is a socialistic approach. The last thing the leftists believe in is academic freedom. Comrade Gus Hall, who ought to be hung, got a standing ovation at Yale University under the auspices of the Yale Political Union And the student body, the faculty, the administration, the city of New Haven lionized Hall while rebutting and canceling the invitation to a Christian gentleman and American patriot, the governor of Alabama, George Wallace. Known communists have spoken by invitation on more than 130 campuses to more than 100,000 students in America during the past 3 years. Communism, whether Russian, Chinese, Yugoslav, or American, is a criminal conspiracy to destroy God, family, and freedom. Communists, pro-communists, anarchists, subversives, and all other traitors should be convicted of treason, imprisoned, deported, or hung. The people who lack the morality to stand on their feet and say no will someday have to say yes on their knees. How did we get where we are? Who brought us here? The liberals are now talking about Armageddon, the last war mentioned in the Bible, when all shall be destroyed. In 1958, the late Congressman Francis Walter, chairman of the House Committee on Un-American Activities, said, quote, "The Kremlin has succeeded in enlisting, at a conservative estimate, more than 1 million Americans." This was in 1958. "There are at this moment the equivalent of some 20 combat-ready divisions of enemy troops on American soil." Close quote. Fellow travelers, contemps, misguided clergymen, teachers, one-worlders, and half-brights. What can we do about it? Educate and convert and activate the neutrals and the uncommitted. Oppose the enemy and not each other. What is this crusade all about? Basically, our fight is for morality. I've been asked, even by some conservatives, what's morality got to do with it? It's got everything to do with it. We could win the war in Vietnam in 3 months if we wanted to. We seem to prefer a 10-year stalemate. This would require a completely regimented society at home. As you know, our president offered the North Vietnamese a ceasefire and $1 billion if they would form a coalition government and be good. If you can't beat them, buy them. We now speak softly and carry a big stick of candy, an all-day sucker for all. Obviously, our Cold War allies are not for sale. They are for rent. One of our problems is that they don't stay bought as long as it takes us to raise taxes. Like our union leaders, they keep on escalating the price. Nations, like individuals, don't stay bought. I haven't read the papers today, but day before yesterday, there were 125 recognized governments, so-called, and we give to only 99 of them. But what we have given to them, plus the interest we've had to pay on the money, now totals about $136 billion, and is 39% of our total federal bonded debt. We simply must save some money for the moon. It may be a terribly disadvantaged area. We have arranged for Russia to get there first with a man, but we are determined to get there first with foreign aid. We now have 71,416 government employees, 22 federal agencies, and 19,000 overseas paymasters dispensing some type of foreign aid to 99 foreign countries and 9 territories at an annual cost of $7 billion. More money and more people than we spend on our entire farm program. Our collectivists now outvote our farmers. We provide the equipment and the know-how to build such things as textile mills in Russia, so we won't be bothered with having to grow and weave and ship so much cotton. At least one American cargo ship renamed Kohonik, which we lend lease to Russia in 1943, is now home-based in Havana, Cuba. So at least she's only 90 miles away. Small world. For 20 years, our foreign aid has been the lifeblood of communism. It has redistributed our wealth, eaten up our gold reserves, provided free see-the-world vacations for congressmen, consensus-crats, their families, and girlfriends. Some of our super patriots scream that aiding the enemy is treason. Perhaps our super patriots are the ones guilty of treason. Depends on who finally prevails. For if it prosper, none dare call it treason. We sent 2,200 dress suits to undertakers in Greece. They'll be the last ones to let us down, no doubt. We give wheat and Metrical, bubble gum and false teeth, birth control equipment, and sex rejuvenators. Take your choice. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Our best friend, Great Britain, used to rule the waves. She now waives the rules and the expenses. Britain has received only $9 billion from us, and she is so grateful she sells buses and things to our neighbor and friend, Dr. Castro. Britain has cut our armed forces in half to provide tax cuts and expansion for our welfare state socialism while postponing payments on her debts to us again and again. Britain, once free enterprising, is now freeloading. In 1964, some 200 ships flying free world flags carried supplies into North Vietnam. 40% of those ships were British. Japan, Greece, Norway, Lebanon, Italy, West Germany, and Panama. Now I hope that American mothers who lose their sons in Vietnam may get some solace from the thought that our friends helped kill them. We've given the above friends $30 billion. If they spit on us as they accept our gifts, as NASA, Sukarno, Tito, and others have done, we must remember to live up to our friend Khrushchev's inspiring tribute. When you spit on Americans, they think it is due. We have given over $2.5 billion to help Tito succeed in Yugoslavia. When Tito was young, he had a fine record as a bank robber in Cordoba, but then he fell in with the wrong crowd and turned communist. He shot down our planes and killed our flyers after the war was over, and we repaid him for this by training some of his flyers at our Perrin Air Force Base in Texas. And now he is one of the many bloody buddies of our Supreme Court Justice, Earl Warren. They play together at Tito's Black Sea Resort. Families that play together stay together. Even if I had unlimited time, I couldn't hope to accurately assess the foreign aid program. It's sort of like trying to hug a cloud or determine the connection, if any, between the National Council of Churches and Jesus Christ, or like nailing an apple pie to the wall, or predicting who Lyndon will have his arm around tomorrow. Some super patriots ask, if Russia has accomplished so much by giving away so little, why have we accomplished so little by giving away so much? Take a given country like France. France has received $10 billion from us in foreign aid and is therefore almost completely pro-communist. Not just pro-good communists as we are, but pro-bad communists too. France has recognized Red China and reportedly will share atomic secrets with her. De Gaulle has now gone communist, whether or not he carries a communist card in his pocket. His every act is pro-communist and anti-American, just like some of our own State Department leaders, teachers, students, and businessmen. De Gaulle is making periodic raids on our gold. Anybody who holds our gold certificates and notes can get our gold, except an American citizen. In addition to owing us hundreds of millions for World War I and II. France has kept borrowing from us and kept getting outright gifts. Someday, some American hothead is going to suggest that we sever diplomatic relations with France, charge off all her claims on our gold against the fabulous sum she owes us, and tell Charles de Gaulle and his depraved subjects to go to hell. Of course, they might then take back the Statue of Liberty, but she has outlived her usefulness here and is an incongruous sight in the same harbor with the United Nations. What can you do about it? You can go out in your town, community, and work. Quit talking to each other. Talk to uncommitted people, people who don't know. Spread the word. Open an American opinion bookstore. If you already have one, support the one you now have. These stores are essential to the growth of the conservative anti-communist development of your community. It's a permanent headquarters for conservatives in your area. It spreads in your area every day, every month, every year. Great, good, constructive anti-communist material. We get very discouraged in this business. But just think 5 years ago, the number of people who didn't know anything. Sometimes I think the most discouraged are the people who get in a year or two ago and expect to clean it all up and go to the golf course in another 6 months. You know, this thing's been developing for 40 years, and we can't beat it overnight. But we are making progress, and right is on our side, and God is on our side. An old riddle asks, what is it that the more of it you take away, the more it grows? The answer is a hole in the ground. And this also applies to people. The more we give of ourselves to others, the bigger we become. This brings to mind the little fellow who was told this by his mother. We were put on earth to help others. He thought it over for a few minutes and then asked, well, what are the others for? An age-old maxim, which will never be outdated, is the golden rule. But the golden rule should not be misconstrued to mean forced equality or share the wealth. If you are a person of goodwill and honesty, you don't want to be helped unless you're willing to help yourself. Jesus was not a socialist. Jesus believed in the profit motive. He recognized that 3 men had different talents and abilities in varying degrees. Some gained more talents with what they had, and these were rewarded with more talents. However, Jesus took away the talent of the man who did nothing and gave it to the man who had 10 talents. He congratulated those who profited. A friend of mine named Paul received a new automobile from his brother as a pre-Christmas present. On Christmas Eve, when Paul came out of his office, a street urchin walked up, walked around the shiny new car, said, "Is this your car, mister?" Paul nodded. "My brother gave it to me for Christmas." The boy looked astonished. "You mean your brother gave it to you and it didn't cost you nothing?" "Gosh, I wish..." And he hesitated, and Paul thought he knew what he was going to wish. He was going to wish he had a brother like that. What the little boy said jarred him all the way down to his heels. "I wish," the boy went on, "that I could be a brother like that." Paul looked at him in astonishment, then impulsively added, "Would you like to go riding?" The little boy said, "Yeah, I sure would." After a short ride, the boy turned and with his eyes aglow said, "Mister, would you mind driving in front of my house?" Paul smiled a little. He thought he knew what the boy wanted again. He wanted to show his neighbors that he could ride home in a big automobile. But he was wrong again. "Will you stop right where those steps are?" the boy asked. He ran up the steps. Then in a little while, Paul heard him coming back. But he wasn't coming very fast. He was carrying his little polio crippled brother. He sat him down on the bottom step and then sort of squeezed up against him and pointed to the car. "There she is, buddy, just like I told you upstairs." His brother gave it to him for Christmas, and it didn't cost him a cent. Someday I'm going to give you one just like it. Then you can see for yourself all the pretty things and the Christmas wonders that I've been trying to tell you about. Paul got out and lifted the little lad into the front seat of his car, and the shining-eyed older brother climbed in beside him, and the three had a memorable Christmas ride. That Christmas Eve, Paul learned what Jesus meant when he said, "It is more blessed to give."